Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am pleased to welcome you to a two-part series this week and next week dealing with the publication of 3 books. In our 33 years of doing this program, we find that from time to time when we do books that you seem to really enjoy that, and we have different authors on our program, and many of you want to read their books after they've been here, so that is our goal for these 2 weeks. I welcome to the program, first of all, 2 residents of Coeur d'Alene for many years and 2 individuals I've known for a very long time. I'm so pleased to welcome Bliss and Annette Bignall to our program, and Bliss is an attorney, and Annette assists him, and she's also a former college faculty member. And I want to say a little footnote that's of interest. When I started this program 33 years ago, Bliss Bignall was my first guest, so thanks for returning after 33 years.
Takes a long time.
Yes, you're patient, although you've been on the program since that first show at another time. But again, welcome to both of you. We appreciate it. And these 2 guests are the editors of the 3 books that we're going to talk about. And I'd like to ask my staff if they would put up the picture of on the screen of the first book. It's called The Mothers. And if they could put that up, we had made a copy of it. There it is. That's one of the 3 books that we'll be discussing. And then the next book is called Western Argonaut, and it should be coming up next. And you can see what that book looks like. It's a very, very thick book. And then the third one is called Sandals of Service, and you see that there. Our wonderful staff is able to do those things in advance. And we're also very pleased to have as a visiting panel member today, Kimberly Rice Brown. She is a historian and is very familiar with these books, and she'll be a great asset as we proceed through them. She is the past president of the Post Falls Historical Society, and she's also been associated with the Kootenai County Historical Preservation Society. If I may call you Kim, welcome to the program. It's so good to have you here to assist. In fact, before you ask your first questions, Kimberly, I would like to read from the jacket something you said, which I think really sets the tone for these 2 programs. Reva Bignall's 100-year family history sweeps across the velvet of South Africa to begin a universal journey of love, living, birth, and death with intuitive insight into English immigration, race relations, and early Mormonism in South Africa. To skip some of this part of this, Ms. Brown goes on to say this story of survival in the agrarian West intertwines music, religion, hard work, and love into the lives of the men, women, and children of the family. Bignall's portrayal of the mothers, Charlotte, Elizabeth, Elisa, and Annie Francis, and their diverse personalities weave the thread of continuity from one generation to the next. An excellent combination of oral, religious, and family history. I think it's such a good summary of what we're about to do. And with that, we invite Kim to ask the first series of questions.
Thank you, Tony. For Annette and Bliss, first of all, I'd just like to congratulate you on taking a piece of family history and sharing it in a very unique way with its universal aspect of history is oftentimes built on economic and political history, but we've taken personal history and brought that alive. And I know that both of you are historians. How did you get started on this project? How did you take on the publication of these works?
Well, this is rather interesting because my mother tried to get this published many years before her death, and I even agreed to pay for it, and she wouldn't let me. Said the book should stand on their own feet. Well, prior to that, she called me in and she said, I want my estate to make sure those books are published, if nothing else. And that was about 13 years ago. And I've had a hard time quitting the practice of law so I could get ahead. But this has taken us about 2 years, I would imagine, at our time, during that time. And we, on the original manuscripts, we wound up typing them in my office and sending them back to her when she was trying to get them published in the 1970s and 80s.
Well, just from a personal perspective, and I realize that you have a strong background in history, Bliss, and then Annette has her English background. How much work did each of you go into the editing? I guess I was curious about that.
Why don't we ask the editor-in-chief here?
We did hire an editor first to do it, but all that I could see that she had done really was retype from the manuscripts, because we always had the manuscript. I could go back and look if they had a word that wasn't right, or I felt when I read through it, this couldn't have been it, you know. So I would go back to the original manuscript and see what the word really had been. And so the first two books, well, of course, we chose the artist, who we thought was fantastic, Beverly Jaquish, who lives in Post Falls, and she did a marvelous job with it. And so that part is certainly of our editing, that we chose this wonderful artist. Bliss wrote the forwards to all three books. He dictated them. Actually, with Bliss's dictation, usually I may change around the order of something, you know, a word or two, or maybe even a paragraph, but for the most part, Bliss dictates and it goes out that way. The third book was the one that I had to do so much editing on. I did a tremendous amount of editing on the third book. I don't know how it happened, but she switched on that one from active voice, which the other two were, to passive voice all the way. So I had to get that out, put it back into active voice, because passive voice is so weakening. And then, for some reason, also in that third book, so many of the sentences were hitched together with "and." So I had to take that out and instead make it present participles and so on, just for the elegance of the language, to make it better, make it more readable. So that's where I came in really for the most part on that.
The books themselves are very little change from my mother's original writing. She's a beautiful writer. She really was.
Well, you can see with her work the power, I guess, the interplay of her religious beliefs, her education itself, and her respect of education, and then the intertwining of history with her personal research. I found all three of them. A lot of people think that history is very, very tedious, and oftentimes it can be a very hard read. And these were very, very, I'm not going to say easy to read, but because of her writing and because of bringing the geography to life, bringing the personal experiences to life. They were all all a different read, but a very unique read, from not at all as heavy as history can be in reading it. So I would like to congratulate all your mother, certainly for her years of dedication, and to you for bringing these out. I guess my question is to you, did you, especially you, Bliss, growing up with a mother with such talent, how did your mother influence you with regard to her personal history?
Well, I wrote 14 pages on it, but I'm not sure that answers your question. History was a big thing in our family. My father, my mother, I caught it. My younger brother caught it also, as far as that goes. And we had probably the best library in the whole county at that time. And I've explained, not only did we have the library, we had the New York Times Book Report weekly. We had either the Sunday edition of Los Angeles Examiner or the San Francisco Chronicle, I think it was, in our home at all times. And so we got a tremendous background. In fact, the principal of high school came later to our home one night, and after he looked over our library, he said, "No wonder my older brother and I never went to the libraries to get our work done. All you had to do was go to your own library," and that was true.
I agree with Kim. In reading some, I haven't got to read all of them all the way through with my schedule, but I too agree with you that it's storytelling in a very lively and a very effective way. Not only the trips and migration, but also both wonderful things and tragedies and the hardships, as well as the celebrations that you had. Let's go back a little bit and talk about, there are a number of very prominent women from your family, and here you talk about your mother. Let's identify, and in reading from Kimberly's summary, there are a number of women in a very...
I'm going to turn that question over to Annette, because she had to proofread this 14 times.
Yes. Annette, would you identify them, not only Bliss's mother, but going back...
The first one was Charlotte Elizabeth, where we meet her in the first chapter of the book on her 17th birthday. as she's riding horseback across the veldt and admiring what a gorgeous spring day it is there, with all the flowers blooming on the veldt.
So the family would come and the wound
family,
up in Utah. And
right, but originally the family had migrated down from England
right.
for land in South Africa to farm. And then they were converted by a couple of Mormon missionaries.
While they were working in South Africa.
While they were working in South Africa, right. And the oldest daughter, who is the second mother in there, Eliza, she was about 17 at the time that whole family was converted.
Okay. And then at what point, on dates in relation, at what point did this happen, and what point did they leave South Africa and come to the United States?
They came to the United States maybe, not maybe 5 or 6 years before the outbreak of the Civil War.
Okay. So these books, and again from my review, they're very heavily concentrating on the 1800s
yes.
in Utah, and then coming on up to the to present time. So until Bliss's mother, after being converted to the LDS faith or Mormonism, was that one of the reasons why they chose then to come to the United States?
That
and come
was
to Utah?
the reason. Yes, the reason to come.
Then share with us upon arriving in Utah, and maybe Bliss will go back to you on this. Whereabouts in Utah did your family settle and spend their life?
Well, basically, they came to Salt Lake like everybody came. And then Brigham Young spread the Mormons, immigrants, out all over the Intermountain West. She's probably one of the greatest persons this country's ever seen for sending out families and starting little towns all over Idaho, Nevada, Wyoming, and in Utah. And once they got there, they stayed there for a while to earn enough money, and then they went up to Cache Valley, which is Logan, there's a big city in it. Okay. And Millville is about 2 to 3 miles south of Logan. And it was a town of about, I would say, 500 to 1,000 people.
Now, your mother, was she born here in Utah?
Yeah, right in Millville.
Millville. Mm-hmm. So your grandmother and your grandfather arrived there, and then she was born in the Logan area and lived her life there.
Right. Well, she lived it up until she taught school, and she went to Utah State and taught school in southern Idaho. That's where she met my father, and who was a pharmacist at the time.
And then was a resident of Idaho?
Well, for a while. Eventually, we wound up in Heber City, Utah.
Okay.
My mother got tired of my dad working in drugstores all around the West. He said, this time we're staying. Okay. And we bought a store in Heber City, and that's where I lived from the 3rd grade up to the time I went to college.
Okay. Well, thank you for us getting this set the stage, and then with that, I'll go back to Kim.
One of the things that I really enjoy about the writing, and it's not a Vogue thing, it's a matter of your mother bringing in the role of women and the role that women have played in the immigrant story, in the settling of the West, and the role that they play in families, the strong role that they play and that they need to play. And your mother seems to have, it's not a preachy way, not a religious way, but for any mother, I would just recommend the books for the role of motherhood. Your mother lays it out very strongly. And a lot of times through history, we can reach people more effectively than the modern setting, because people can look back and say, wow, you think I've got it tough now? Look at what these gals went through. So do you think your mother practiced what she preached, basically, in her values about the role of women?
I'm sure she did. I'm sure she did.
And her respect, I guess what shines through is the aspect of the strong role that mothers have with their children. I think you brought up the idea of the learning around the dinner table or wherever the learning took place, you know.
Well, frankly, when you look at it, what my mother did, I called her a Renaissance woman, and I mean that seriously from all the reading I've done. She fit that category, but what she did and so forth, in that valley as a druggist's wife, she had her own gift shop. All 5 of us, 5 of the children were born there, or had been born in Idaho or come to Utah to live. So, and all of us had good educations. All 5 of them wound up with college degrees very shortly. My mother and father even got their degrees afterwards, after we left home. in college. My mother taught for 3 years, and I just don't know how that woman did as much as she did, because she was so skilled, not only in writing, but in gardening and cooking and all the other things she did, crochet and knitting and everything under the sun. And at the same time,
veterans organizations that she was member of.
right, and during World War II, she must have been writing daily to at least 11 or 12 of our cousins that fought anywhere from Guadalcanal to the Elbe River in Germany. And we'd usually get a letter, most of them will admit they got a letter once every 10 days or so forth. She'd been writing these letters after 10, 12 o'clock at night. But she did keep constant communication with all of her nephews that were serving overseas. And 11 of them came back.
Another thing I enjoyed about these books, and for people living in this area, is actually the story of the settlement of the West and the travels that the Mormons of Utah did. I was very tickled to read about the impact of this area, local history impacted by the role that, in this case, Tom Jessup, working with 150 men as a subcontractor for various railroad companies. Those are the kinds of stories, how often do you ever hear about subcontractors in the building of anything? So the idea of what she has done is she's really brought to life some of the personal aspects. What do you do when your husband's gone for 5 or 6 months out of the year? How do you take care of...
There's a secret there in polygamy. You take one of the wives along to cook.
Well, and I did enjoy that, because being a non-Mormon, I was very curious as to how that topic would be handled.
But speaking about local history, Kim, one of the things I first found out, and this is many years ago, when they were following Tom Jessup to northern Idaho, the only time he lost a man in his whole crew, to our knowledge, was one that was drowned down around Benoit Lake when he was working on railroads there. He did get up to Wallace. We don't know how much work he did on that line. But everybody except me and our family had beautiful voices, I swear. My grandfather, Jessup, and my grandmother, that'd be my great-grandfather, and my grandmother, his oldest daughter, were singing on the streets of Spokane during the winter because the railroad didn't pay, so he couldn't pay their men. Out there singing all the time. He in his top hat. You interested that in this book, and it's over on this thing here on how he. This is where he was dressed as a top hat, ready to go to the deal, and they got enough money to start. But what really saved them when I found out that they were building canals in Post Falls, and they went over and hired their whole crew out to help out in building those canals, and that really is.
Well, Bliss, we got this up here, and the camera people are so good, and there is the top hat and what he was doing, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean,
so top hat and let's go ahead of cane.
Yes.
but they were very musical. In fact, later on, when they were building the Salt Lake Temple, 4 of those great singers from Cache Valley, and 3 out of 4 came from Millville, I think, sang at places all over the state of Utah, raised money to pay for the building of that temple in Salt Lake City.
What a fascinating story. I'm going to join in the same kind of interest that Kim has. Your mother and was remarkable in the number of things she did. She had a family to take care of, and your father was gone part of the time working, and there was a lot of illnesses, and like Kim said, that was not as easy as it is now, and cooking and writing. I'm going to go back to Annette to do a couple of things for us, but one is as someone who joined the family when you married Bliss, give us your kind of profile of her, and didn't she have a remarkable sense of history? How many people, with all the other things she had to do, would keep this kind of writing or transcripts, knowing that not only honoring Bliss's family, but this is an honor for the whole history of the migration to Utah and the role of religion, in this case the Mormon or LDS religion, and as Bliss already said, the movement of working so hard in helping establish communities in an area that was quite desolate at the time.
Well, my feeling with respect to the mothers was extreme gratitude that I am a creature of the 20th and 21st centuries and not of the 19th, because I don't think I could have lived long enough for the hard work that they all had to do and all the babies that they had. And you just marvel that they could work that hard and undergo so much adversity. Really, it was adversity, and still make it through to a pretty ripe old age, each one of them.
Let's go back into that just a little bit, because, again, as Bliss said, you worked very hard on this and helped with editing. Reva Bignall was Bliss's mother.
Yes.
Take us. She must also have been very much influenced by her mother and her grandmother. Would you kind of do a profile of the, I guess we're talking 4 women here as far as the history of this.
Yeah.
Didn't they all have some common characteristics?
I think they probably all had an inquiring mind. I certainly know that Bliss's mother had this inquiring mind, and in editing the Sandals of Service discussion there, I could see that as a child, see, she was the first child born after her father's return from the South Sea Islands, his mission 3.5 years. And I got the idea from that she was probably his favorite child, but undoubtedly because they both had the inquiring mind. And so they liked to go into discussing everything. And he would tell his tales of on his mission there in the South Seas. And as you saw from the book, what she wrote about him and so on, he got along with everybody. He had a tremendous intellectual curiosity. And she was like that, too.
So she got a lot from her father. Mm-hmm. But Bliss, I'm sure your mother talked to you about the other women that are in the book. And
you know, I'm not so sure that happened.
Really?
I know my grandmother.
Yeah.
And I remember visiting Tom Jessup's other son in Millville, but I really don't remember that too much. I don't know whether we missed connections here or not. But I would like to point out one thing. I picked up an old folder the other day that had most of the clippings I sent her many years ago about me and my success up here in North Idaho. But in it was a prologue she had written for Western Argonaut. This was just 2 weeks ago. And in it she talks about going to her mother, that's Annie Francis, and telling her that she wants to write this story of her family.
While she was still in high school.
Yeah, 15 or 16 years of age.
And so all the way back in her life, this was one of her dreams.
Yeah, it really was. And not only that, her grandmother gave her no hope at all. She thought it'd be the biggest waste of time, and she really couldn't do it. And that's all it took to my mother to hear someone say she couldn't do it.
So this is really interesting because it's a different dimension than I was anticipating. So in relation to Charlotte, I believe, and there was Elisa, is that Eliza?
Eliza Jane.
Mm-hmm. And Charlotte and Annie.
Annie Francis.
Annie Francis. So there was, you have in the book about the life of those 3, but
right.
But my misconception was that they were the kind of people that handed this down to your mother, Reva, and yet she was more influenced by her father, and it was more, it was just there with her at a very young age.
What she said was that she had gone around to all of, again, she was thinking about it when she's still in high school. So the grandmother, her grandmother, naturally was still alive, and maybe even her, I don't know whether her great-grandmother was still alive or not at the time, but might have been, or at least her grandmother could have told her about her great-grandmother. So that she was finding out this information, thinking always of doing the Western Argonaut there, thinking always of that, but finding out these other things and saving them aside.
That's interesting, because her mother and grandmother, maybe even great-grandmother, they were willing to tell her the history, but they didn't have the insight that she did that should be recorded and placed in a book.
Right.
But she knew that, and that's so she a lot of oral history she was getting from them, wasn't she? Kim?
Well, that's a good point. I think, and I don't think that's one of the reasons that it has the power that it does, because she blends personal experience, but she also brings in a lot of her personal research. And she brings in if you want to travel to England, you can read in Western Argonaut. You are there in England before the immigration.
Could I interrupt just a minute? You know, my mother, when I was overseas in World War II, wrote me a whole itinerary of places to visit in England. I was there one day. But all of the famous authors and so forth, she had their homes down and everything else for me to make sure that once I got a 5-day leave, this is where I was supposed to go.
Amazing.
But I think she actually what I like is the blend. You're taking hardcore history, and what she's doing is she's making, through her research and her own learning, she brings that to life. She adds that personal perspective, but in a way, and I think you mentioned this too, some of this may or may not be factual, meaning it's not hard and fast. So in a way, it is somewhat of a historical novel. It has some of those attributes to it. But in writing any history, unless you can bring it alive, and I think her descriptions of Africa, you go there. And what she does is she connects the centuries very, very well. You can move from the 18th to the 19th to the early 20th, well, not even to the 20th, 18th and 19th primarily. But anyone looking back finds that the power of globalization, whether you're traveling to Africa at that period of time, colonization, all of the situations that we're looking at now, and you could go back and through her work read how some of the early roots of those have impacted us so greatly today. So if you think about Nelson Mandela, you can go back, and when you read the mothers, you get a whole new view of Africa and what it was like then and where it has come. And the same is true, of course, with anyone going abroad, any Peace Corps, kids doing Peace Corps work or any missionary work would have a ball with Sandals of Service. They could relate with that very well. Mm-hmm. So these are just excellent, easy reads. They have a lot of power to them. And I think your work is very easily laid out.
Our clock always wins. We're out of time now, but good news is that you both will be back as guests along with Kim and I next week. I just want to echo, Kim and I are on the same page for sure. I just think in what parts that I got to read, it was she takes you with her back, and when there's a sickness, you feel like you're there and you're struggling with those crises, and she has that talent. And so, ladies and gentlemen, next week when we have our guest returning, dealing with these 3 books and the story of a family that migrated to Utah and the history of how they were converted to Mormonism in South Africa, from England to South Africa, and then here. We're going to tell some of the personal stories next week. I think they're very powerful, and we hope you'll be with us that time, and we will do part 2 of this program dealing with the story of an immigrant Utah family during the 1800s. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.